By training aerobically, an athlete will improve their respiratory system. One way this will occur is that our respiratory muscles, such as our diaphragm, external and internal intercostal muscles, will become stronger. This means that the maximum lung volume will increase because when contracting they are able to pull the rib cage out more. This means that we can inhale more air and therefore increase the amount of oxygen available in our lungs. This will improve gas exchange as there's more oxygen that can diffuse into the capillaries. By having stronger respiratory muscles, it will also enable us to expire with greater force, as when the muscles such as the internal intercostal muscles contract, they will contract with a greater force and push more air out the lungs by increasing the pressure by a large amount. Another adaptation to training is that the number of alveoli in the lungs will increase. This is a useful adaptation, as when increasing the surface area, which is what the alveoli will do, it will increase the amount of oxygen that can diffuse into the bloodstream at the same amount of time. It will also increase the amount of CO2 that can diffuse out of the lungs. By increasing the amount of oxygen that we can consume per breath, it will decrease oxygen debt at the start of exercise, and at the same time it will decrease the EPOC. As you can see from this graph here, both the oxygen, it will take less time to recover. As you can see from the graph here, before pre-training, when their exercise stopped, which is at 4 minutes, by 8 minutes they weren't back at resting levels. However, after they were post-trained, you can see that after 4 minutes of recovery, or even 3 minutes of recovery, they were back at resting levels, which shows that they were much more efficient at recovering. At the same time, you can see here that there's slightly less oxygen deficit as they return, as it goes to a plateau much faster than a pre-trained person. The reason why oxygen debt will decrease is because they're able to take in more oxygen when they're trained compared to an untrained person. This means that they are in oxygen deficit for less amount of time. As I said, EPOC will also decrease during recovery. This is because the lactic acid will combine with oxygen and it will produce more products such as glycogen, glucose and pyruvate. This will help the body recover as they are able to remove lactic acid quicker. It's important that they are converted into those products as they can now enter the Krebs cycle with oxygen and therefore break down lactic acid into ATP faster. By increasing all of these, it'll eventually increase their VO2 max. This will mean that the body is better at using the available oxygen in the bloodstream. This means that the systems won't have to work as hard to supply the muscles or working tissues with the required oxygen. By having a more efficient respiratory system, it can reduce the risk of health diseases such as COPD. COPD is when there is a poor airflow into the lungs. By exercising, it will reduce the effects as it will start to re-strengthen the respiratory muscles again. This is important as exercise will help them tolerate activity so they're able to perform better everyday tasks together. By increasing all the respiratory dynamics, it will eventually increase pulmonary ventilation. One reason is because tidal volume will increase. This is because the respiratory muscles are stronger, so they are able to, and the lungs are larger. This means that they are able to intake more air without applying any force. Breathing rate will also decrease, as you can see from the graph from during our multi-stage fitness. Breathing rate will decrease as they are able to take in the same amount of air, however, with less breaths. As you can see from pre-training, the person had a breathing rate at rest of 16 breaths per minute. And then at level 8 of the multi-stage fitness test, they had a breathing rate of around 36 breaths per minute. However, post-training, we would expect that to decrease to around, maybe for this person, to around 13 breaths per minute. And then it will also decrease during exercise. For example, take the level 8 stage again. It might decrease to around 29. This will show that they have improved as they are able to intake the same amount of oxygen but with less breaths. Going back to recovery and oxygen deficit. During a longer distance event such as a marathon, reducing the amount of oxygen deficit will be very important. This is because they want to use the aerobic energy system as soon as possible. This is so they don't build up lactic acid and blood lactate, which will eventually cause them to fatigue. However, it could also be important during a game of football, as if they were in oxygen deficit and using the ATP-PC system or the anaerobic glycolytic system, this means that they will also be building up lactic acid, and then they'll fatigue earlier during a game. This will reduce their performance levels, as they are now unable to produce the contractions needed to reach maximum power or force. However, oxygen deficit wouldn't be important in events such as a sprint or such as a 100-meter sprint, or a power lift. This because the duration of them isn't long enough for the for the aerobic energy system to start up and become dominant. Neuromuscular system. After training aerobically, you'll start to make adaptations in the muscles. For example, one adaptation is the increase in slow oxidative and fast oxidative glycolytic muscle fibers. This means that there'll be an increase in the number and size of slow oxidative muscle fibers, which is important as they are adapted so that they can last for a longer amount of time. They can contract more for longer periods of time. This could also mean that fast glycolytic muscle fibers could start to perform like fast oxidative glycolytic muscle fibers as a result of training aerobically. This means that they'll be able to last longer, but one negative is that they can't produce maximal force. Another adaptation in the muscles is an increase in myoglobin, which helps stores oxygen in the muscles. This will support the increase in the amount of oxygen available in the muscles, so that they are able to work aerobically and again not build up lactic acid and not use up the ATP-PC stores. The final neuromuscular adaptation is there'll be an increase in the amount of mitochondria in the muscles. This has a positive impact on both their performance and their body, as they are able to increase the amount of ATP that is being produced. This will increase the amount of times that the muscles can contract, as they have a greater supply of fuel. The amount of mitochondria increase will depend on the amount of training that's done. By increasing the amount of ATP, therefore the amount of muscular contractions, this means that they are able to run or do their event for a longer period of time. For example, this would be useful in a marathon or triathlon, as their muscles are able to keep contracting for the longer periods of time. Again, this isn't important to an anaerobic event such as a 100 meters, as they need to do maximal contractions for a short period of time. Energy systems. One adaptation to the energy systems is the increase in aerobic enzyme activity. This means that enzymes such as SDH and citrate synthase will become more active. This will enhance the glycogen sparing, so this means that you'll use your stored fats over your glycogen stores. This means that the body will metabolize fats over glycogen. This would be important to an aerobic event such as a triathlon or a marathon, as the athlete would want to use the fat stores over the glycogen stores. This will prevent them from, as I say, hitting the wall at any stage during the event. One way that we can show adaptation is in the respiratory exchange ratio. For example, pre-training, an athlete might have an RER of 0.92, which would suggest that they are mainly using their glycogen stores as their main energy source. However, post-training for an aerobic event, they might have a lower RER of around 0.7, which would suggest that they're burning 100% fats. This shows that adaptation has occurred as an athlete will become better at glycogen sparing during an event. And another adaptation of the energy systems would be the delay of OBLA. This means that athletes will be able to work for longer or at a higher intensity without lactic acid building up. This would be important for a marathon runner, as they will be able to find out the intensity that they can work without the effect of fatigue occurring. Similarly, an adaptation is that they will be able to buffer lactate and therefore delay blood lactate effects. One way to show adaptation in our investigation would be from the blood lactate scores during our multi-stage fitness test. There are two ways that we can show adaptation has occurred during this test. The first way would be through the blood lactate scores. As you can see, before training, their resting blood lactate was around 1.8, which would be similar to post-training of around 1.8. However, as you can see on level 4, their blood lactate score was around 6, which would suggest to us that blood lactate has started to build up. However, after training, we would expect that to be lower, for example around 3.5, which would suggest that they're still under their OBLA and still working aerobically. And also, after the event, we would also expect their scores to be lower. As you can see, before training and post-test, their blood lactate was around 20.2, which is very high. However, after their training for around 6 weeks, we would expect their post-test results to be a lot lower. For example, for this athlete, around 12. Another way to show that they have improved is that they're able to reach a higher level of the multi-stage fitness test. This could be because before training they would fatigue much earlier than they would after. By reaching a higher level again, this would show that they are more suited to the activity. By finding out when blood lactate buildup starts to occur for a professional athlete such as a marathon runner will be important. This is because they don't want to run the event whilst building up lactate, as they just won't be able to finish the event. This is so they will find out when blood lactate occurs, and then they'll run just under that so that they can keep going at their highest intensity. By training, they can then delay the build-up, so they are able to run at a faster speed or higher intensity for the event, and therefore they will improve their time.